maybe we can. There we go. Though that was fascinating. Thank you very much for sharing it. And the human account has been a real journey for us at Dahlberg. You can imagine what goes into creating such a nuanced analysis that seeks to take segmentation to a new level, whereby we don't just understand the traditional age, education, but we understand the interplay of all of those factors and the overlay of those with the personality and the psychological and so on. But it does leave you wondering, doesn't it? Just a little bit of, all right, well, that was interesting, now so what? How do I think about what to do with it? And that's basically the essence of our conversation today. So I would like to just pass the microphone down and invite each one of my illustrious panelists. Just introduce yourself, just your name, your organization, and then we'll dive into the conversation. Yeah.
Hi, good morning, afternoon. My name is Ivana Damianov. I'm with here at CDF, and I work on access to finance and financial inclusion.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Caroline Nyambesi. I work for NMB Bank, and I'm in the Strategy and Investor Relations Department. Thank you. Hello, good afternoon.
Yeah, I think we need a second microphone.
Good afternoon. My name is Irene Kiria. I run an organization called the Women of Achievement, where we work with girls and women across Tanzania and now Africa to support their socio-economic transformation. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we've got two, so we should be well covered. So, there's a lot that struck me just in the snippet that Neil shared. But I'm curious, maybe just to start by asking each of you, as you sat and you watched that, what were some of the things that jumped out to you, either as surprising because you didn't expect them, potentially relevant to your own businesses? Maybe just share something of that nature. Why don't we start with you, Ivana?
I think what struck me when I was looking at the two profiles that you showed was the number of different financial services and products that they did use. So I think one of the misconceptions is that, if you are young or if you're low income, you don't have that many options and services, whereas actually, informally, you do. So it could be with savings groups, it could be, and savings groups, I think I also wanted to mention, comes in various size and shapes and forms. So it's not just a Vikoba, it's not just a VSLA, but it could be a Nupatu, it could be a Chama, it could be a burial society, and it's that type of conversations that will allow us to also understand the different types of services and offerings we can look at.
Now, I have to ask a quick follow-up. Were you surprised, Irene? Because very few people know Tanzanian women as well as you do. And so picking up on Ivana's point of just seeing the extent to which these products and services are being used already, were you surprised by that or not?
So I was actually very happy that those points were highlighted, because I've spent the last 3 years observing and working with women saving groups to understand the culture of saving, why they save, the motivation. I even went further to start my own group with 25 of my friends, so that we also become a part of that process. And one of the things that I've learned during the 3 years that I immersed myself in understanding that the saving groups play is that there's so many different types of saving groups. They're driven by different motivations and aspirations. And when you look at what products are offered in the market, it feels like there's one blanket for all type of services. there is a big need to look deeper into the different statuses of women, the different needs, and address those gaps. So I'm very happy that these points have been highlighted.
Thank you. And Caroline, last but definitely not least, from your NMB experience and you looked at the data, what popped out to you?
I think looking at the data, it reminded me of sort of like internal conversations and struggles, I might say, that we face, because NMB doesn't have a specific product for women. And I think over the past few years, much as we're in the process of developing such propositions, we've tried to avoid falling into the one-size-fits-all Or, I think at some point a lot of banks we'll give you a pink card and a pink T-shirt, and that would, symbolize something. So I think to me it further cemented, sort of the fact that there's still a lot to learn about the women's segment in general, and then within the women's segment, understanding the different needs of women. And to me, it almost validates the back and forth that we've been having within the institution with how to go about it.
And I'll share my own, and it was similar to yours, which is I knew at an intellectual level, of course, not all women are the same. I mean, yes, of course. But when I saw some of this data emerge, what struck me is it's not just the implication that therefore what we need is different, but how we will receive it best is different. So listening to some of the findings around it's how you communicate, because the vulnerable individualist has much lower levels of trust. It's how you market or how you message around a certain financial product, because different women subsegments will hear things differently. I found that quite fascinating. I'm curious, at UNCDF, financial inclusion and working with women is sort of core to your DNA. How do you look at this kind of data and think, I see the potential for how this can take what we do to the next level?
When I look at the data, what I see is that banks are still very far removed. So that process is going to take a long time, whether we like it or not. But in the meantime, I think there's a lot of options that we can do to facilitate and to move that forward. I think what Julia had mentioned was really interesting in looking at the transactions and the daily transaction and digitizing those. And I think that's kind of the same approach with savings groups. When you're looking at savings groups, no matter how small or big they are, they do keep a record. So it's looking at that record and trying to digitize that record, or at least collecting that data and growing it in order to have that database that could potentially show that credit history and hopefully a selling point to a financial service provider.
And when you think about taking some of these things into conversation with your colleagues at UNCDF, what do you think what will that conversation look like? Where do you expect there to be? Similar to Caroline's point, there's always the recalcitrants, the ones that you have to win over and make the case and persuade. Where do you think this will, in the conversations at UNCDF, where do you see those points of potential friction or divergence of opinion around how this is important and how to integrate it?
I think there's still a lot of misconception around working with the unbanked or the underserved, especially women, especially rural areas, which is where we primarily focus. And I think that perception has to change, and I think that the way that we do that is through evidence-based data. And those are probably, I think, some of the issues. The other issues are around financial education, digital literacy, and what role exactly that could play in increasing confidence and usage and uptake as well, and how to deliver that.
It's always how. And Caroline, how about yourself? Now, it validates, as you said, and I think that's a really powerful word. It validated the conversations you've been having. What do you think now the next stage of conversation is that you could have integrating these kinds of findings?
I think, especially with regards to product design and even further than that, as you also mentioned, how we deliver these products. So I think a few years ago when we were creating our Vision 2020, at that time, everyone in the bank was sort of like, digital is the future, we'll use digital. And I think, unfortunately, some of us even thought digital would solve all of our problems. So then, for instance, you had the Reliance driver who uses the phone a lot. So then we were like, if we have a mobile app, then that should solve all of these person's problems. Or when you have when you have someone who doesn't necessarily use physical banking or a mobile phone, then we're like, banking agents should solve that problem. 3 years later, we do have a mobile app, which works really well. We do have 6,800 agents, but then usage is still quite low. So I think, the next level is sort of like, fine, now we need to, first off, we need to further understand what do women want and how do we deliver what they want. But then even go deeper into, we might have all of these fancy products, but how do we deliver them in a way that can promote usage?
Well, I'll say one thing we've learned in our work at Dalberg has been too often all of us fall prey to the problem of thinking, well, if I build it, they will come. If I have the product, they will come. And no, too often that's not the case. And one of the drivers that we have found, actually working with one of the banks actually across East and Southern Africa, was marshaling their female staff members to be the front line in engaging with the women they wanted to sort of market a product to or bring in as bank customers. And it struck me when I looked at NMB, I think you're almost 50% women staff. And I think the women client base was 20 or 30%, somewhere around there. So it's an interesting opportunity maybe to think about how do you use the women within NMB with the women outside of NMB that you hope to bring into your fold. Yeah. Now, of course, again, this is guesswork until you understand what the women themselves think. And one of the themes I hear here is a lot about perception. Perception of women and whether or not they're bankable, perception of what they need as a product. You're a social media influencer, among other things, Irene. So how do you think about how a shifting of perceptions, how could we think about shifting perceptions at the same time as we deliver the product or design the product, at the same time as we get more nuanced in our marketing and messaging? How do we do that?
So I think one of the key things is, first of all, we're women here. So we get motivated by things that are meaningful to us. So you cannot shift perception if you don't have a solid thing that will motivate and support that process. So the first thing is, what are the products that, how do we sort of, how do I say that? So women are already galvanizing, they're in community saving, they have their structure. And if you've spent time observing some of these things, they meet every week, they have an entire organization process that they have. So when we are thinking about integrating them into formal financial services, for example, it's about how we support an existing infrastructure, not taking them away from what they already know, love, and are happy with. It's working, yes, they need more, they might know, they might not know, but how do you build an infrastructure that supports what is already taking place? So when we talk about changing perception, we are just highlighting and elevating those things that are working, adding value to what is already working, and that is what makes it easy. I mean, I have a communication company. The last 13 years, I have spent supporting businesses and brands communicate. And we always say, you cannot communicate what does not, what is not reflected. So it starts by having solid things that work and make sense. And I would just like to add something. The question that you asked earlier about, what the data means, what sort of conversations, we should be having. Like I said, the last 3 years I have spent quite some time working with Vikoba saving groups, and in the last year and a half, we have designed a platform that is digitizing the Vikoba process called Koba. We're actually currently piloting it, and what we have realized is that, first of all, there are so many groups. There's no one-stop place where you can go and access this data. And just looking at one association, for example, one of the associations we work with is called Vikoba Sustainable Development, that has 20,000 groups of 30 people. That is over 600,000 women in one association who have been saving and lending and borrowing money for the last 10 years. They have records, they have data, but where is all of this? So just looking and working to digitize and enhancing and capturing all of that information so that in the later stage we can work with NMB and support them further. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Well, after we sort of conclude this part of the conversation, we're going to be opening it up for questions more broadly, and I'm sure you'll get some about that. So let me then come back to the question of, so how can we get our arms around this, and what do we do differently tomorrow as a result? Maybe Caroline, to start with you, share some thoughts, if you will, about, I saw that I was a bit surprised actually at how low the group savings numbers were. I would have expected them to just be higher in these particular segments. When you think about, let's say, the vulnerable individualist, you have a wonderful agent network you mentioned a moment ago. You've got a mobile app, but you're not getting the uptake you would have imagined. Do you think that you can serve this vulnerable individualist who is in the rural area, who is not easy to access? Your bank has taken a couple runs now at different access channels. And if yes, what are some of the ways in which you think you can get creative about that?
So I guess just to answer the question, can we serve? I think we definitely can. However, some work has to be done in terms of first educating this person. Because I think one of the key characteristics of the vulnerable individualist that stood out for me is that they have very low trust levels. So I feel like once an institution or, once someone can figure out how to deal with that aspect, then this person can definitely partake. Because the vulnerable individualist, regardless of their circumstances, they're still able to save quite a bit, whether it's through mobile money or, and I think if this person is educated, even if it takes, if it takes them taking 10 minutes out of their day to do banking or something, they definitely would. But I think it's just there needs to be a little bit more education so this person can understand how they can use different products. And I think the vulnerable individualist is at a pretty good, they would be able to sort of like not only do vanilla banking, saving and borrowing, but I feel like they're also the demographic that would also be able to invest their money into investment products if they understood how they worked. Because I think in the profiles that we got, the lady was even thinking of taking some money that she had borrowed and paying school fees. And I feel like if this person understood how investment products work, then, they could have very easily used that. So I think that crucial element is missing at the moment.
I think that's a great point you made. One of the big findings for us has been the power of bundling, of looking at the female client, banking client, if you will, holistically, and saying, I'm not just going to sort of talk to you about the one financial product, but I'm going to understand what your financial needs are and think about what would a combination commitment savings and loan look like, or, for school fees or otherwise.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that also fascinates me about savings groups is I have a friend, Grace, in Uganda, and she's passionate about savings groups, and what she tells me is what I'd like to see everybody doing with savings groups, which is she belongs to 5 different savings groups. One is an investment club. That's what they're called. So they're savings groups, but they're investment clubs. So the investment clubs, what they do is they save, but it's for an investment purpose. Those funds are going towards buying land, and they're going to have the funds they need in 12 months or 16 months. Then they have the savings groups at the office. That's specifically for school fees, for example. Then they have the other one, which is the family community fund. So whoever falls sick, they don't have to ask everybody for bits and pieces of money, but they have the community saving, and so on and so forth. So it's just a rich, I guess, tool that really evolves and reflects everyone's desires.
Absolutely. So let me now maybe open it up to the broader group, and we can pass maybe a microphone if I can ask my colleague Devang or Neil to help out. But a question for any one of us, or reflection on any of the interesting data that you've seen today. And don't be shy, and know, women, that because this is about women's financial inclusion, you get first dibs on the questions. Yes, here in front. Right here, Devon. Oh, right here.
Thanks so much. Question for you, Caroline, which is, you mentioned this potential gap for the vulnerable individualists to think about an investment product. And there is some innovation that we're seeing already in places like South Africa with sort of very small amounts of investment via a mobile product that's starting to take off. What would it take to start piloting or developing something like that in Tanzania for this particular segment?
Very interesting question. I think, much as so. You've given an example of South Africa, right? But I think before I answer the question, a disclaimer is our literacy levels are much lower. So then I wouldn't also copy something directly from South Africa and bring it here. In the Tanzanian context, I think. So one thing that I've come to learn, at least from the few women that I deal with and my own family, women in the rural areas versus in urban areas, one thing that works, for some reason, when a woman understands something, like really, really understands it, then they're much more trusting and comfortable to do it. But they need to see the outcome. So I'll give a terrible example. I'm sure you've heard of these pyramid schemes that a lot of women, unfortunately, end up putting their money in because they don't know that other investment products exist. One thing that pyramid schemes do very well, they show results. So sort of like, bring your money here, bring a few friends, and then in a few months you have gained extra points, whether it's real or not, or like, and then in 2 years you can have invested enough to buy a car, or etc. And it's terrible, but somehow their strategy works. So I could be wrong, but I think, at least from what I've observed, if women really, really understood what they were getting out of it and the potential of how much they could get out of it, that could really help. So even if, and unfortunately, when banks talk about these things, we still haven't figured out the appropriate language to use. We'll say NMB has a fixed deposit account where you can get 12%. But what if we were to tell women, if you invest 100,000 in 3 months, you could have gained 200 shillings out of it? I think just starting at that level could maybe move us a few notches up.
I just make a reflection of another theme I sort of hear emerging, which is this: it's about awareness, it's about education, and it's about communication that's tailored to different subsegments. And I guess maybe a follow-up question then, it begs in my mind, who are the partners, maybe it's a UNCDF, maybe there are other partners that would help you, NMB, or any bank, be able to develop the kinds of educational materials, develop the awareness building campaigns that have that sort of level of sophistication. When we're working in India, for example, right now around Aadhaar and the digital identity, and a piece of what we're doing in India is that how do you explain the power of digital identity to poor women and how it can be a driver for financial inclusion and then ultimately women's economic empowerment. And so as I reflect on how I think about what we've learned through that experience in India, I'm curious about how you would think, okay, if I were really to launch a campaign where I tried to build this awareness and do this education, what could those partnerships look like?
I think for NMB, we would be better suited to already. There's so many players who are already doing it, albeit at a small scale. But I think we could really leverage more on such partnerships. Currently, we work with Women's World Banking. I'm not so sure if you. Yeah, and we do not have a women's financial literacy program. We have a children's financial literacy program, and we focus mostly on girls as well. It's called Wajibu. So what Women's World Banking does is they train NMB staff who volunteer, and then the staff go to schools and they and they go to different schools, train the kids on basic, this is a piggy bank and you can put money in, then after, something like that. But, much as we're doing that, I still don't think it's enough. And we could definitely partner with more players who are already doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions from the group? Oh, good. I see some more hands. Please stand up and just say your name if you can and fire away the question.
I didn't think I'd have to stand up. Hi. Hi. I'm Tanya Mulamula and I'm happy to be here today. I have a question to the panel about, I guess Irene and, I'm sorry, I'm NMB. You mentioned product design, and I'm just thinking with huge institutions, for example, if you're going to go and create a segment your customers for private banking, you create your branches that to appeal to the very high net worth individual. So you hire people that may look like them or know how to cater to them. You have a lounge that is very, very high end. So when I walk in there, I'm like, great, I have my cappuccino, I have my valet parking. You go again to children. If you're creating a product for children, you create the environment whereby if a child walks in, they're comfortable, there's beanie bags, there's screens, there's toys, there's piggy banks. But in terms of design thinking and communicating with design thinking in mind, why, having institutions try to create environments that women can walk in and feel trusting, as opposed to who do I see when I walk in? Who is going to open up my account for me? Who is going to talk to me? Someone who looks like me, or the environment is not, rural areas, the environment cannot be, so are you thinking about product design and communication that is designed where you really have to go into the crannies and nooks of things and start creating environments where women who we keep saying are being vulnerable and not very comfortable can actually feel comfortable when they walk in? I'm not sure if you have any case studies or if something that we can possibly think about.
And I'll just maybe say, absolutely, Caroline, you can offer thoughts, but I think even Ivana as well, UNCDF goes through the similar experience, and there's a pilot, a couple of pilot programs that no doubt you thought about these exact questions. So please.
Yeah, so we have had this situation. So we've supported a number of financial service providers throughout sub-Saharan Africa. And when you start targeting
Just the training models, level help. Again, I'm going to bring back to my group saving team. So they have trainers who show up every week to provide entrepreneurship.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and then remarks that they want to make. So you don't always ask the question, and you still have something to share. So last question, if I can. Yeah, please.
How do you ensure that for those individuals, how do you ensure that they even have the capacity to qualify for a loan in the first place? For example, vulnerable individual, they might have a lot of traditional land but not have land with title deeds. And after, if they do qualify for a loan, how do you ensure that cost of capital is low enough for them to be able to access the loan? Is there any innovative idea that NMB is thinking about it?
Interesting. We are thinking about a lot currently because obviously, we're lagging behind in this area. I won't even lie about it. But I think, how do we make sure? so for instance, with the vulnerable individualist, right? You know this person has land. And normally if you go to the Tanzanian rural areas, it's sort of like within a village, if someone is lying about having land, you get like a representative or like I don't know the appropriate name for them. But, so that the due diligence part, that is, sort of like we do have a process as a bank to ensure that yes, this person does have land. I think the biggest caveat has been the title deed, as you mentioned it, and currently as we speak, NMB is talking to a few development finance institutions to see ways that they could help with with collateral. So we're looking at guarantees and things like that. So hopefully that should at least help to ease some of our risk appetite when it comes to lending to certain groups. It is difficult, but I think slowly, and I guess the other thing to add as a bank, we've also really had to, NMB is sort of like we call ourselves a very comfortable bank. We've always lended to very, sort of like to areas where the risk is very limited, where we know we're going to make our profit and business is going to go. But I think more and more we're slowly venturing into to look at communities that were previously ignored. So I know we still have a very long way to go, but best believe we're doing a lot of thinking internally.
Wonderful. Then let me invite our panelists to say any concluding remarks. There's so much that we could be discussing about how do we take financial inclusion for women in Tanzania to the next level in the name of economic empowerment. And maybe I'll start at the end and come back down this way. Irene, then Caroline, and Ivana.
Thank you. So my concluding remarks would be, when you think of financial inclusion and supporting women into, we should look beyond the direct service that we want to provide and look at the ecosystem and the surroundings and the supporting infrastructure that is there that will, in the end, support what we are trying to sell them. So if, for example, we want to support women in Mara region and we want them to have access to financial products and all of that, but they're struggling to with tools to support their agriculture activities. So perhaps now thinking about bringing partners who will support that so that the economic activities are thriving, and then we can come in and offer our products and services. So looking at that from a holistic point of view, because the challenge is with, yes, even if I have access to credit and you're giving me a loan, if I'm not going to have an activity that will support me to pay you back that loan, I'm getting into deeper problems, right? So that is my my remarks. Like, how do we look into supporting women from a holistic point of view, bringing in different partners, and they're there, so working together and creating a value chain of support that in the end, we're all smiling and happy.
I think adding on to what Irene said, I think personally, I hope that more financial institutions, especially big banks and, sort of like well-established banks with networks all around the country, such as NMB, can more seriously look at the business case for having women as clients, because I think that's something that's often unfortunately overlooked. There are a few financial institutions that are trying, but a lot more can be done. And I think, with something such as, with data such as what was presented today, it provides a very good foundation to start, not only thinking, but actually really creating an environment where, women can access financial institutions, but not only access, where they can continue to use it over and over again for their own economic betterment. Yeah.
I believe that savings groups are an incredibly important tool. I think they're a tool for empowerment for women, but also a stepping stone to formal financial services and inclusion. However, I think the way we're going to get there and the way we're going to reach scale and sustainability is through partnerships. And this is what I think that we should all be focusing on. So, just being on this panel is great because I get to meet all of you who I will follow up with. And it's building that network and building those.
Well, here. 3 cheers to partnership and to sharing good practices. Everyone, please join me in thanking our panelists for this wonderful conversation. And it looks like I am passing the mic to Steve Kasayake. just popped out of nowhere. But if you're done with us, we'll leave the podium. You will stay here? Okay, we'll stay here. All right, thank you.
A big round of applause for Yana and her team. So my name is Steve. I co-lead the Tanzanian office with Devang. So I'm the guy who's closing things up. But before we actually close it up, I'd love for us to give another round of applause to our high energy panel. It's also good to really hear that the data that was presented by Neil and Julia actually strikes home, because it actually speaks to what everyone is actually hearing. So at least we, in Swahili, say hatukulishwa matango pori. So we actually had the truth. So a big round of applause to Julia and Neil. And a quick reflection. I think what I'm hearing is a lot of need for not just banks, but all financial institutions. And I think a big conversation that we need to take forward around structuring products that actually reach out to women. And actually, I love the question that was asked in the audience around how we even structure banking halls to be able to respond to women's needs, or even the people who are listening to women or responding to women or speaking to women. And now really Anna coined it around the awareness, the education, the communication that's actually more appropriate. So I do hope that our communication experts in here, looking at Irene and the rest in here, can actually help us get better at communication, because this is something that's really needed. I think we do, in our spaces, we do know how to create products, so we really think that we know how to do this, but maybe the communication, how we actually put this out, is something that we actually need to build that skill set in. Now, before we actually close, and actually not really closing, but actually open up the next session, which is cocktails and maybe tea, I'll actually talk about the tea part, but I won't really say much about it. I'll invite someone up who actually has started up a business, Kazi Yetu, Tahira, to come and tell us about her business and really interact with what you're doing. Karibu.